In Module 2, we will take a look at another important aspect of academic English, the purpose or function for using language. This module will be shorter than the first. We will first look at the definition of communicative functions, followed by some examples from STEM content. First, we'll preview some key vocabulary for this lesson. Stop the video so you can take notes. You'll have a quiz later. Module 2 Key Vocabulary, Communicative Functions. Functions means purpose. Recount is to display knowledge or tell about events. Explain is to clarify the why or how of ideas or actions. Argue is to persuade by making claims supported by evidence. Discuss, to interact with others to build meaning and share knowledge. Communicative functions are a language user's purpose for speaking or writing. The function or purpose is often represented by active verbs within the learning outcomes. The purpose for using language can be achieved using a range of registers, from formal to informal, academic to social. Your learning objectives will determine whether you want your students to explain, for example, using an informal, social form of English, or if the goal is for them to produce academic English. WIDA has identified the common uses of language across all of the academic content areas. This chart shows an example of the communicative functions for a task, along with examples of tasks that students might do. For example, if we look at explain, this really means that we want students to clarify the why or the how of ideas, actions, or phenomena. They might do this by examining relationships among content-related ideas and concepts. They might also show a cause and effect relationship, like the paragraph about hurricanes did. Or they might show the consequences of behaviors. For example, if we continue to cut down forests, carbon dioxide levels will increase. Here are some examples for what the purpose for communication might be in science contexts. In other words, the functions of academic English. Students might compare densities of various objects. They might explain the difference between a food chain and a food web, or describe processes and procedures used in an experiment. And they might explain the five-kingdom system of classification. The next few slides will demonstrate what this might look like in practice. In a lesson about the Five Kingdoms classification system, here are some sample objectives. Students might classify organisms, compare and contrast characteristics of different kingdoms, and the academic language function is really to explain by classifying, comparing, and contrasting. Here are some features we might expect in a text that students read or listen to. This gets at their receptive knowledge, or their listening and reading. At the discourse level, we can expect charts or text that list traits for each kingdom. For example, food source, does it have cell walls, how does it reproduce? At the syntax level, we can expect frequent use of the passive form of verbs. And some likely vocabulary at each tier is listed here on the slide. This is what academic English might look like across the discourse, syntax, and vocabulary levels for a task that students would complete, either orally or in writing. For example, in groups, they might determine the 5 most important and distinguishing characteristics about that kingdom. And then those groups might teach each other about a kingdom and collect facts about the other 4. Here are some examples of what the purpose for communication might be in a math context. In other words, the functions of academic English in math. Students might compare the lengths of various objects. They might explain what strategies they used to solve a problem. They might describe the specific attributes of a parallelogram, or discuss their thinking and argue using the language of mathematical solutions as evidence. And perhaps they'll explain how to solve a problem step by step. In order to explain this problem, students might engage with all three areas of academic English with the text first. The Burger Hut receives regular deliveries of food. All of the types of food listed in the table were delivered today. In how many days will the Burger Hut receive another delivery of all three items on the same day? So at the discourse level, they're reading the story problem and needing to locate key information, as well as read the table. There is some passive voice, word delivered, for example, and markers of time. And then again, one might consider vocabulary at the 3 tiers of vocabulary for your students. This is a review of those features of language in a text from that story problem in math. Then you would ask students to create a task where students might work with a partner to explain what is happening in the problem and how they will come to the correct answer. Ask them to practice putting the story into a more informal register by imagining that they are explaining how deliveries work to a new coworker. The discourse or discussion in an informal register might sound something like this. Different kinds of food come more often than others, but today we got all of it. I'm trying to figure out when we get them all on the same day again. In 3 days, we'll get lettuce. 6 days from now, we'll get potatoes. And in 15 more days, more burger patties will come. I'm trying to figure out when they'll all end up on the same day again. Here's a look at what some of those features of language might look like in this math example. At discourse, we have an informal register, imagining you work at the Burger Hut and need to help somebody understand. At the syntax level, you see some examples of what students will most likely say. And again, here are some potential vocabulary words that would be used or need to be addressed as they engage in this task. In Module 2, we looked at the purpose or communicative function for language tasks. The language we choose depends on that purpose. What will students do with language? Will they explain, justify, argue, recount? That purpose determines the kind of language we use, and we need to help students notice the patterns of language and find examples. Finally, decide which features of language to focus on within the STEM lessons to help students expand their use of academic English.